Welcome to Backyard Oasis, a podcast designed by and for older adults living in the beautiful Pioneer Valley of Western Massachusetts and produced in the tech studios at Greenfield Community College in Greenfield, Massachusetts. Backyard Oasis reaches out to older adults who seek knowledge to help them live more thoughtfully, healthily, and happily, who hope to inspire others with their ideas, and who serve their communities in the interest of the greater good. We hope you join us frequently in our pleasant Backyard Oasis for wide-ranging conversations with a diversity of people who are growing older and want to talk about it.
Hi, I'm Denise Schwartz, your host. You know, it's called the windshield phenomenon, and it relates to the observation that our cars' windshields don't receive as much insect splattering as they used to. You know, like when we were kids and we'd go for a drive with our parents on a warm summer evening and would return home with a windshield covered with dead insect bodies. Why doesn't that happen so much anymore? Where have all those insects gone? You know, you might say, hey, there are enough of them around to make weeding my garden a miserable job, even as you plant perennials that attract insects and other pollinators. And it's true. Bugs dominate the world. It's estimated that 10 quintillion insects are flying, marching, hovering, or burrowing at any given minute. And yet, beekeepers, insect experts, scientists, and researchers agree that insects are in decline. They're disappearing due to a lot of things, but primarily high-intensity agriculture, overuse of pesticides, diminishing habitat, and climate change. Now, data supporting all of this is easy to come by with a Google search, of course. But here's something to keep in mind. A study by researchers at the Center for Biodiversity and Environment Research at University College London, and that was published in Nature in April of 2022, indicates that, and this is a quote, climate change and intensive agricultural land use have already been responsible for a 49% reduction in the number of insects in the most impacted parts of the world. And that's the end of the quote. Now, impacted parts of the world is important to remember because in some places, insects are not in decline. But we'll talk about that later. Right now, let's meet my guest, Dan Conlon. Here in Western Massachusetts, Dan and his delightful wife, Bonita, are well known. He's a professional beekeeper who, along with Bonita, manages Warm Colors Apiary here in South Deerfield for honey production, crop pollination, and raising bees. They work with the Agricultural Research Service, USDA Genetics Lab, identifying inheritable genes that improve honeybee defenses against varroa mites and disease. Okay, a little more about Dan before we get started. Dan is the past president of the Massachusetts Beekeepers Association, the Russian Honeybee Breeders Association, Board of Directors Eastern Apiculture Society, and he received the Beekeeper of the Year award from the EAS, and he was Massachusetts Beekeeper of the Year. He's written articles about bees for bee magazines, and he's contributed to numerous books on honeybee management. And he is a good guy, and he really likes to talk. So get ready. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Denise. How you doing?
I'm good. So here's a little ditty that you sent to me when we talked about doing this session. I was going to sing it, and then I thought, no, that would be a really bad idea. So here we go. No more bugs on the windshield, fewer birds in the trees. Humans best look up before nature brings us to our knees.
Doom and gloom, I'd say.
Doom and gloom.
Yeah.
Dan, is nature really going to bring us to our knees? What's the story here?
I think that a lot of that's up to us and what we do in the future, near future. But yes, I think we're on a bad path right now.
Why? What do you mean?
Well, let's start with understanding a little bit about how the planet functions and runs.
Okay.
You know, you and I have talked in the past about some of these things, but the planet really needs energy. and I'm not talking about necessarily oil energy or any of that, but it starts with sunlight.
Sure.
Everything on the planet gets its energy from sun. However, you and I can't do much with the sun except get burned, right? Unless we get it in a different form.
Right.
So what happens is, of course, the plants on the planet use photosynthesis to turn that sunlight into different types of edible plant food that it, of course, feeds insects and other animals. Are the herbivores. Those are our plant eaters. And you have about 37% of all creatures on the planet get their food directly from plants.
You mean
exclusively?
So we have 37% of the creatures on Earth are vegetarian?
Yes, there you go.
Yay.
You like that one.
All right, I like that.
So about a third of the creatures that we encounter are vegetarian, and what they're doing, and this is biologists refer to this as a trophic level of nutrition transfer, and that's sun into plants. Plants now have this energy stored in their leaves and their plant parts, and then the insects and other creatures come along and eat those plants, and they convert that into tissue. Wow. And then they become food for the next thing on the food chain.
Oh.
And so, and of that, you have insects being the most nutritious thing you can eat.
What?
Yes, pound for pound, they have a lot more nutrition than beef does.
Well, that's fine with me.
Not that I'm trying to convert anybody, but the point is, if you want to read some good explanation, is this get one of Doug Tallamy's books. He does a great job of explaining all of these things, and he writes that it takes thousands of caterpillars to raise one nest of birds.
What?
So thousands of caterpillars give you maybe 3 or 4 baby birds, right? And so think of how many caterpillars that requires. Now, when you interrupt that cycle, and from that, of course, the birds, get other things. They also eat insects as adults, but fully 96% of all birds require insects to raise their young.
You can watch them. If you have a nest of birds in your yard, you can watch the parents singing through the air, snatching insects out of the air to take back to the nest.
Yeah, and that includes the seed eaters. They may, as adults, eat seeds, but they still feed their young that high nutrition, high protein caterpillar. So anyway, so that would be sort of the second transfer of that energy.
Okay. From
the insect larva to the bird.
Okay.
And of course, other mice, all kinds of other critters would eat these things as well. And so now you have that going on, but at the beginning of this is the plants. Now the plants are really one of the things that's driving this loss of insects.
Tell me how, I don't understand that.
Well, we don't think about this, I don't think, enough, but the plants do a lot of things for us humans. Every breath we take, that oxygen came from plants.
Yeah, that's a really hard thing to understand unless you're, a scientist person.
It wouldn't be hard to understand if you didn't. Yeah, it wouldn't be hard to understand if you couldn't breathe, though, right?
Well, that is true.
And the other thing is, and this is the thing I think that the planet does all the time, is it constantly is cleaning itself or trying to, filtering things, cleaning the air. Plants lock up a lot of the excess CO2.
Right.
Their roots act as filters. They filter water all the time in the ground. They filter rainwater as it leaches through the soil. They also take out poisonous things and toxins from the system.
Oh, they're so remarkable.
So this is what the planet does. If it has its own, if the normal things are happening in a place, then the planet mends itself all the time. It renews itself.
So are we saying that it might not be doing that right now?
In places, it's definitely not doing it. And what's happening is that is growing. I guess another piece of this would be that you have to look at it from the standpoint in nature. All these plants, these multiple diverse varieties of plants on the planet, like 350,000 species, say.
Right.
whatever their estimates are now. Pretty much it's agreed that about 92 to 96% of all plants on the planet require pollinators,
Okay.
okay?
Okay.
Because they use flowers to reproduce.
Right. Oh, yes, right.
So if you take the pollinators out of the mix, you're going to have plants disappearing. And the way that nature has things set up being, nature likes variety. Nature likes difference. Nature likes lots of choices. So one plant may be good for one thing, but not good for another. A good example are northeast rhododendrons.
Oh, yeah, what about them?
The rhododendrons, which are native to this area, you will see bumblebees on those flowers all the time.
Right.
Same with mountain laurel. But you'll never see a honeybee on those because it's toxic to honeybees.
Wow.
So these some plants are toxic, some aren't, but you'll see different pollinators on different plants. Again, if you eliminate the plant that feeds that particular insect, it disappears. Now, after that goes, who pollinates the plant if they're exclusive? And if they're exclusive, that would mean that you would have that plant not reproducing. Eventually, it would decline and go away, and anything that feeds on that plant also goes away.
Wow.
And we refer to that as cascading extinctions.
Are we heading in that direction?
We are definitely heading in that direction.
Is that?
We complain a lot about the rainforests, and about 15% of the rainforests have been clear cut, and we get all worked up about that. But think of the East Coast.
Okay.
70% of that is gone from what it once was.
70% of what?
All the forests.
On the East Coast
Yeah.
of the United States?
Of the United States.
And we continue to cut down trees.
Well, we've changed it. Now what we've done is if you go down to the southeast, they plant different types of pulpwood pines in nice straight rows.
Oh, yes, I've seen that.
But there's no diversity in the plants. Without diversity, it means you limit what creatures live there, what insects, what other types of things. And that continually draws down what all these insects are there for. And I always like to say that nothing in nature lacks purpose. Everything in nature has a purpose.
Yeah, we don't always think about that, do we?
We don't.
We just want to get rid of things if we don't like them.
That's right. So that's been the human way to control things is to either get rid of all of it and replant what we want and do it our way. But that, of course, interrupts this whole cycle of energy transfer, okay? And now we'll get back to that. But the other thing you have to keep in mind is bigger areas that are natural support more variety of organisms.
The key being natural, because I'm thinking about big areas like industrial farming where you just have acres and acres of the same crop. That's not natural.
No, and that's not diversified at
Right.
all. I mean, you can do things around farms to continue to help the natural pollinators, certainly. Excuse me, but that isn't going to necessarily be enough. So what happens in the Northeast, in the East Coast, and you'd probably hear about this, is fragmented habitat, meaning a lot of the insects and birds migrate all the time, up and down the coast to other countries, and it's their normal pattern.
Okay.
But not if they come to Delaware and it's all paved over and they've cut down everything in between.
So what do?
Sometimes they don't make it any further than that. And they're supposed to be going north. Sometimes they go around. But less and less are successful in achieving their life cycles migration.
So, I never thought of that. But when we think about the first example we used, the windshield thing, and we said that really happened when we were kids. Since we were kids, Dan, because we are older adults. Since we were children, we've had more and more cities, more and more population growth. I'm just going to talk about the East Coast, more and more paving of things, and so that is sort of what you're talking about. Suddenly, migrating insects, they can't get through all of these urban areas that we used to, that weren't there when we were kids. So we
Yes.
had more of them then and maybe fewer now.
Correct.
Did I get that right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow, okay, got it.
And they're becoming, think of them as islands, okay? They're islands certainly on land, but they're isolated. And so if they're on this island that has the habitat they want, they don't move off of that island. And that island's going to only support a certain population, okay?
Okay.
Plus, in nature, when it comes time to reproduce, creatures tend to find similar of the same species in other places so that you're not too closely related.
Oh, yeah, okay, sure.
So we understand that, right?
Yeah.
That's good genetics.
So insects do the same thing?
Everything does that.
Really?
Everything. It is the sort of the non-related matchings that drive the diversity of the planet. So, and nature wants diversity. So keep that in mind. So anyway, what I think happens then, of course, is that you have smaller and smaller islands supporting less and less population, and that diversity shrinks. So biologists will tell you that large, diverse plant communities support a bigger variety and bigger populations of all kinds of creatures. And the smaller it gets, the fewer are supported. And the diversity shrinks as well. So you lose in two categories. Numbers that, by the way, are have to be there to feed the cycle of energy.
The whole chain,
energy.
yeah.
And the other thing is you need to have groups that can meet with other groups of the same species that don't belong to the same group. So there has to be some movement with animals to different areas. So
it's like so we're talking about migration.
Yeah, it's a migration. And so what we need to be doing, of course, is to take those fragments and somehow connect them together. And there's a lot of talk about that these days, and there are groups trying to do more of it.
What do you mean? Like, what do they do?
Well, they're trying to identify areas that are still have a lot of the plant varieties and are close together, and maybe they can do things to encourage that to be connected somehow.
Can we do this with our little gardens? You know, like I'm thinking about here in this area, we're all talking about making little pollinator gardens and planting more varieties of native flowers and plants and things. Is that helpful, or is that just not enough?
Well, it's probably not enough, but it is helpful. I mean, I would always err on the side of to do nothing is worse than doing anything.
Yeah. But does that give migrating insects enough places to find what they need and to live healthily until I know they don't have long lives, but is that helpful if like a neighborhood has a lot of little gardens in it?
I can give you two actual examples.
Okay.
A number of years ago at UMass, I attended a pollinator convention, and there was people from New York City representing the 5 boroughs, and they were talking about an experiment they did, which they gave out 5 pollinator plants to anybody who wanted them. They were putting them on their fire escapes and their empty, alleyways. They were just putting them wherever they could around the city, around the boroughs in the city. And their only job was they had to sit and watch the flowers for so much time each day and count how many pollinators came to visit. And they were able to get such interest in it that they could never keep up with the plants because everybody was doing it.
That's
but
great.
what they found was they had all these pollinators return that they had not seen in the city for years. So it actually brought the pollinators back within a few years.
Wow.
And I have a list of it somewhere because I thought it was fascinating.
It is fascinating.
But it was a really great experiment. And what it showed was, the old thing, if you build it, they'll come. And they do. They really do.
Wow.
So if you're doing that in your garden, and again, I'll get back to Doug Tallamy. If you read his book, Bringing Nature Home.
Oh, Bringing Nature Home.
In Pennsylvania, he and his wife bought a house that was evidently scraped off the turf and rolled out the grass or
Oh,
something.
yeah, sure.
One of those kind of
Yep.
things. If Doug hears this, I hope I'm describing it fairly. But his point was there were no real plants. But him being an entomologist and a scientist and a professor, he started planting specific plants because he was interested in the insects, the butterflies and all the other things. And as he would get plants, he would go out and do a survey every so often of what insects he would find on his, I think it was 5 acres or something. And it sounded like it's in the middle of a relatively isolated area. But every year, the numbers grew from a few to hundreds.
Wow.
And I think the final count was over 400 different things,
Wow.
including some rare butterflies that had not been seen in that part of Pennsylvania for years and years and years. But it was because he was planting certain plants that he knew those particular insects would be attracted to just to see if they were there. They'd show up. So to answer your question, if you've got the right things growing around your yard, you're going to probably find some interesting insects that are going to find it.
Well, that sounds hopeful. I mean, this is sort of like a doom and gloom topic, but it does sound hopeful because we know that, if we don't have all the insects, that does lead to, I hate to say it, but human demise, and you're going to talk about that a little bit. But I was curious about, here we are talking about planting things, but people are also like using pesticides like crazy. I mean, I see people doing it where I live. Mm-hmm. Tell me about pesticides and what they've done and how we can get people to decide that it's okay not to use them. And maybe we can bend over and pull those weeds instead of just like squirting them.
That would be a good start, or even recognize that maybe those weeds have a purpose.
Yeah, we don't understand the purpose of everything, do we?
We don't really.
Does anybody?
We don't take the time. Excuse me. Well, I mean, I think that's another big topic. But pesticides, of course, ironically, were part of the Green Revolution after World War II, and that's when we really got into our heavy. We're going to fertilize everything with manufactured fertilizer. We came up with the herbicides, the pesticides, all the things we use today, fungicides. And I think it just became one of those things where, we put these things into the system. I mean, I was appalled at reading a report the other day. There's one of the poisons, carbon furan, Furan, carbon furan, I guess you'd say, has been banned in this country for some years, and it's still being used basically to kill animals.
What do you mean? How? What is it in? What product is it in?
A quarter teaspoon will kill a 400-pound black bear. That's all it takes.
Dear.
It's so toxic.
Well, who's using it?
Well, people who are certainly should be found out about and arrested. But that it started out where it was being used in countries to kill things that were like eagles who ate people's chickens because they wanted to protect the chickens, so they bait things and but part of the pesticide problem has become that even when things get banned, people have stockpiled things and it keeps coming back. So, it's, I don't want to get too off the topic, but pesticides, of course, we know now that we have created a situation where we are dependent on things like fertilizer. We don't fertilize by using the manure from the cow barn and grind it in. We don't do cover crops that we can add plant material to the soil to build it up, like buckwheat and things like that, which were traditional methods of choking the weeds out without chemicals. And we've also turned that whole industry into a very high energy consumption business, which is the other part.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy, and this is the kind of thinking that we probably need to really reevaluate, because it's not going to help us in the future. It's not helping us now.
But Dan, who's going to do that reevaluation? Who's actually going to be talking about this? Because if people, let's face it, if people are making money selling this stuff, is it really going to go away?
Well, it's going to be hard to counter it because the people with money can delay things and tie things up, as you know we see when we watch court cases on the news.
Right.
They can drag on forever. But there have been a lot of successes. Beekeepers are doing more of that, and in some cases, beekeepers and farmers have got together to actually fight a lot of these things.
What do you mean, like decide not to use these kinds of chemicals?
Yeah, and basically take the companies to court and win.
Oh, really?
And win, yeah. And so, but they have to do a lot of work. I mean, it's a complicated process in this country because one of the things we do that other countries don't do, and one of the recommendations, by the way, for helping pollinators is to adopt the European standards.
What are those?
The European standards are that we assume it's a terrible chemical until you prove otherwise.
Oh.
Novel, huh?
Yeah.
Know how we do it in this country?
Yep.
We take the data from the company and we take it as, it must be true if you're going to give it to us.
Yeah, and
right?
somebody just wrote that.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think there are severe penalties if you're caught lying about these things, and there are rules, but how much of that really happens, I'm not sure.
How are we going to fix this?
And
is there anybody doing anything in a big way?
There's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, we just in 2022 in Massachusetts, we did take a baby step with the neonics, neonicotinoids.
Talk about that, please.
Well, basically they updated the pesticide rules, and one of the complaints that people like myself have had is that we've always recognized that chemicals are a reality we have to deal with all the time. But there are people who have accountability who use the chemicals, and they aren't the main problem because they are accountable.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is they have to they have to be trained, they have to be licensed and certified. And if they're found to do things off-label, meaning out of the normal recommendations, they can be fined heavily. In the worst situation, they probably could do some prison time and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
So there's some severe, depending what it is. I'm not suggesting that every time you may have an accident with a chemical you're going to jail. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying there are actual penalties that can be imposed on somebody because you should know better.
I see.
You should know better. However, if you're just an average citizen who has half an acre of property around their yard, you can go buy all these chemicals with no license, no training, sold over the counter at most of the big box stores. And even the farmers cannot do that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They have to be certified and licensed to use it. So the system has always been wrong in that regard. And so if you're a beekeeper, we've been for 25 years doing pollination on farms. I can honestly say we've had very few problems with our bees being accidentally sprayed or something, and that's partially because the people we work with are concerned about our bees because they understand the importance of it to their crops and their bottom line, which is the better the pollination, the more crops they have to sell. So it's really a pretty simple formula. So we've had that going on. The new amendments to the pesticide rules for neonics specifically is that you can no longer sell, nobody in the state can sell these chemicals to anyone who does not have a license.
Really? Okay.
So you can no longer go just buy these things, okay?
When you say you, do you mean
you
everyday
and
person?
You and I, because we haven't gone for the training and don't have a license to do this. So I would have to be a certified farmer and have the license to use this chemical.
Well, that's good.
No, that's to me that's a significant improvement.
Yeah.
There were other interesting recommendations in that I found really helpful. One of the other things we have been after, and this goes back to Deval Patrick's time as governor. He and I had talked about using public lands to plant native plants.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we spend all this time mowing highway strips? And
Right.
how much money does that cost? How about we turn these guys into gardeners and have them plant flowers?
Yeah, and I know some places are doing that.
That's right. So why can't we do more of that? Or my big beef used to be with the utility lines and the railroads,
Mm-hmm.
who are basically, even the state of Massachusetts cannot tell them what to do in those right-of-ways. The federal laws come in.
Apply.
Yes. When Steve Kulik was alive, he worked with me on that one, and he worked to basically try to get get the utility companies and the railroads to do more to take care of their right-of-ways. And he got told, it's not your
can't do
business.
it.
It's not your business.
Wow.
Now, this
Are you
was
talking about them spraying?
I'm talking about, what they spray,
Okay.
what they do. So there's two parts. They used to use, of course, herbicides
Mm-hmm.
heavily all the time. And I think I shouldn't be so critical of all the utility companies, because I know some of them have gone to a plant maintenance kind of system of cutting down plants. See, they don't want them in the right-of-ways of the utility lines for obvious reasons. They may need to get in there. And
Okay, well, that's good, though. They're trying to do something to mitigate the problem.
that's right, and that's what we had hoped to see happen someday. Why not put public lands and right-of-ways like that, which I bet you if you populated just the utility line right-of-ways in the state with native plants,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have any problem with pollinators.
That would be pretty nice.
Yeah, and it would look nicer too. So
So there are a few things we need to talk about, because we've already been talking for a long time. You mentioned something about First Nations.
First Nations.
I wanted to talk about this.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think I put a quote. I want to quote. One of the things First Nations is I think out of Ontario, but it represents a lot of Canadian tribes, and maybe some of the border tribes too in the United States. But they actually control a lot of the wilderness up there, and part of the thing that they've always been able to show is that wilderness is thriving in so many ways, and it's the stewardship that they employ with taking care of the land seems to be a very good way to do it. And part of that is they take from the land what they need, but they don't take everything.
Yes.
In other words, they catch a fish for grandma, not
Yes.
the whole school, and they don't do those kind of things. So what that, and I have been reading a report that they issued to the Canadian government at the government's request, asking how can we do a better job of maintaining our wild areas. And the Canadian government evidently looked to the First Nations and said, well, you guys do a pretty good job. What do you do that makes your system different? And it's certainly cultural, because this is their tradition, is you don't take more than you need, which allows nature to replenish itself and heal itself. And so that I found very good. But one of the other things that I found really interesting was the question that you're saying, how do we get everybody on board with these kind of things?
Right.
And one of these quotes that I think I gave to you too, it was from the First Nation, and one of their statements was, it's not enough to just preach the conservation gospel. You need to invite everyone into the tribe.
Exactly.
Meaning we can't have this be a conflict between people. We have to find agreement and bring everybody in.
How do we do that? I mean, I know you don't know the answer.
Well, I don't.
This is something that we've been struggling with forever since humans became humans, I think. But how do we do that? I love that. We have to bring everyone into the tribe. So if we have to look to creating a shared vision for the future, a new one, I mean, it's easy to say this stuff, but Dan, honestly, I don't know how we do that. Who does it? Who disseminates information? How do we get people to agree, yeah, we're all going to do this? Is it possible? I'm shaking my head.
Well, I think there are things that are happening that don't probably get enough publicity. You know, and things like this. Here's a good one. Here's one. I thought this was brilliant. In Iceland, of course, you know, they use geothermal energy because they have so much of it, right? But here's something that I just found out about that's going on in this country. Empty oil wells can be used for the same purpose.
Oh, for geothermal.
For geothermal. They're working on using this 100,000 empty oil wells around the country. And they can put water down in them, get the heat, pump it up, use the heat for whatever to generate.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah, a great idea, and it's kind of a low-cost solution because if they can come up with equipment that isn't overly priced, like windmills that cost $20 million, you know, maybe this could be a reality for small groups, small towns. And so there's that kind of technology, and I'm not anti-technology because I see technology as playing a really important role in all of this because we aren't going to go back to the way it was.
No,
ever,
we can't.
Ever. 30% of all the plants in Massachusetts are introduced plants. So if we talk about invasives, they are all considered invasives, but invasives are just invasives if we don't like them.
I know, that's what people say. I mean, you know, I do a lot of gardening.
It's
and
like the
people
weeds,
say,
right?
Yeah, they're weeds, so let's get rid of them. And
Yeah.
I like what you said. And if we don't know the purpose of something, then we want to get rid of it.
That's right.
If we knew that invasive plant had some medicinal purposes, or if it was really great for pollinators, or it had other really important things that could help us, then we would no longer give it that name, which immediately puts it into a category of like, we don't want it, and we would start to maybe cultivate it or use it.
That's right. That's right. I always say that. People ask me all the time about the honeybees. Oh, how are they doing? I hear they're all dying.
Yes.
And I'll go, well, there's a lot of problems, no doubt about it. But they aren't the ones that I'm really worried about.
What are you worried about?
I'm worried about all the native species. Honeybees have value to humans. As long as humans are around, there will be honeybees because we'll just raise more of them.
Okay.
Nobody raises the wild ones.
That's why you're worried about them.
Yeah, they don't get the same attention that honeybees get.
Because they don't have value for humans, but they do.
Right.
We just don't know it. Because if we don't understand that they're part of that whole chain that you began talking about, if we don't begin to understand that and get the word out that they're important too, then we kind of are not going to see a rosy future.
That's right.
Is that really true?
What's that?
That if we don't really start to take this really seriously, we're not going to have a rosy future.
I don't think
we require attention to insects.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The insects are huge. What do insects do? They do everything for us. They provide food, of course, to the wildlife, but there's other things they do that are just as equally important, such as decaying material in trees and animals and things like that. They break it down, they reprocess it, and turn it into high nutrient fertilizer for plants. Yes. And they take disease away from things that are also a problem for us. You don't want a lot of decaying material laying around, which may have other problems. So, you know, insects do so many things like that that we don't really recognize, and they're everywhere.
So what I think we have to do, Dan, is a great big campaign to get people to like insects better than they do. And I have to be part of that because, to tell you the truth, you know, I'm out in my gardens and I like the butterflies and I like the bees, but I'm not so sure about some of the other stuff I find. Like, okay, I'm okay with slugs now. Spiders, not so much. So how do we do that? We need a whole big education campaign to make people understand how valuable they are. As we wind down now, can you figure out anything that we could leave our listeners with that would help them understand how important insects are?
Well, I mean, you know, they're part of what purifies the planet, and so I think that alone gives them a status that's unique. I think they are the ones that convert all this energy that eventually reaches us, right? And I think that is also really important. You know, I just want to mention one other thing about this is, you know, in the news now we have the forever chemicals being brought up all the time, and I see where our state representatives are debating this. I hope that this goes through. But again, this is something that's in all of our water now. And everybody who gets a blood sample, it's in our blood.
Wow.
So this is an example of what happens when we really have not been paying attention. And by the way, 3M has known this was a problem since 1973.
Well, it's not in their best interest to let everyone know that.
There you go. So you have to look at that, and I get that. That's the kind of stuff that makes me a little crazy, because I keep thinking, I've always sort of had the opinion that if you don't know that it's a problem, or you don't know that it's harmful, you can plead ignorance and be forgiven. But if you know that it's a problem and you ignore it or deliberately still do it, you're guilty of worse things.
That's right, and that's on your conscience.
That's on your conscience. Should be on. I don't know if it's on anybody's, on some people's conscience.
I think it is.
But I think that's that's part of what you need to know. And the other thing is, there's so many insects that we really do have to say are beneficial. I mean, who doesn't love butterflies?
I know. I do like them, but the other ones I'm not so sure of.
But they start out as those little caterpillars in your garden that you don't want to see.
Well, I think that's something that we can leave listeners with, and and I'm going to say what that is. But first, I want to say, Dan, there is so much to talk about. I think we have to come back and do another one. So put that on your calendar, okay? We're going to come back and do another episode. But I think maybe what we should do, if it's okay with you, is leave people with this. And you're the one who talked to me a lot about this. That we have to start to understand that all animals and plants have a purpose. Now, we can't know that because there are so many species of animals and plants out there. We can't know that everyone has a purpose. But we can generalize from what we know about the ones that we know about. They do have purposes in many cultures other than ours. Understand that. Mm-hmm. So this is another opportunity for us to share what we know and learn from other cultures, that animals and plants need to be here. They need to be here. They're all part of our cycle of life. Mm-hmm. We're all in this together.
I agree.
I really think there's so much more we have to talk about. Alex, what do you think? Alex is our producer over there. He's giving us a thumbs up. Well, we got to say more. Dan, I really like talking with you because you have so much information, and anybody who knows you and Bonita knows that if you sit down and have a conversation with you guys, it will go on for hours. I know that's true. We've done that in my house. So let's have another conversation and talk more about why we don't have the insects we had before. Even though, we didn't talk about this, so we definitely have to have another conversation, even though in some areas they are not in decline. Let's plan to talk about that.
Okay.
Any final words, Dan?
No, just that, if you think you don't understand insects, watch them for a while. They're really pretty curious little creatures, and you can be amused.
Well, we need more amusement in our life.
That's right. You can be amused.
Well, I like that.
Tells you my low threshold for entertainment, doesn't it?
Yeah, you sit around at home with Bonita and watch the insects. I have to say, though, you are right.
Cup of coffee and a beehive, and I'm happy for hours.
Oh, good. Let's leave it like that. And I think I'll go home in the garden. I was going to pull some weeds, but I'm going to rethink that now. Thanks for the information.
Yeah.
Let's talk again.
Yeah.
This concludes today's podcast. We're always looking for new ideas, so feel free to reach out to Judy Raper, Associate Dean of Community Engagement at Greenfield Community College, at 413-775-1819 if you have an idea you'd love to share. Special thanks to the creators of Backyard Oasis, Denise Schwartz, Chad Fuller, Dennis Lee, and Christine Copeland. Have a great day.